Half a mile beneath the surface of the Gulf of Mexico, where sunlight has long surrendered to the crushing weight of the ocean above, there is a place that breaks every rule you thought you knew about how this planet works. A place so alien, so impossibly strange, and so quietly terrifying that when scientists first saw it on their monitors, they genuinely did not believe what they were looking at. They rewound the footage. They checked their instruments. They called over colleagues and pointed at the screen in silence, because what they had found sitting on the ocean floor in absolute darkness, surrounded by nothing but freezing water and unimaginable pressure, was a lake. Not a metaphor, not a poetic comparison, not a loose scientific term used to describe something that vaguely resembled a body of water. A literal lake. With its own shoreline, its own waves, its own rippling surface catching the lights of the submersible and reflecting them back like a mirror made of mercury. Water sitting on top of water, a body of water resting inside a body of water, an entire hidden world that had been sitting there in silence for longer than human civilization has existed. And the most unsettling part was not what it looked like, it was what it did to anything that dared to enter it. Before we go any further, you need to understand that the ocean floor is not the flat, featureless desert that most people imagine. It is a landscape every bit as complex and varied as anything on the surface. There are mountains down there taller than anything in the Alps. There are canyons that would swallow the Grand Canyon whole and still have room to spare. There are hydrothermal vents spewing superheated water at temperatures that would melt lead, and there are vast plains of sediment that have been accumulating particle by particle for hundreds of millions of years. The deep ocean is not empty, it is not dead. It is a world unto itself with its own rules, its own rhythms and its own dangers. And among the strangest and most dangerous features of this hidden world are the brine pools of the Gulf of Mexico. Bodies of ultra-concentrated salt water so dense and so toxic that they form distinct visible lakes on the ocean floor, complete with surfaces you can see and shorelines you can trace with your finger on a map. They are real, they are measurable, and they have been killing things in the dark for millions of years. To understand how something this strange could possibly exist, you have to travel back in time. Not thousands of years, not even millions of years. You have to go back roughly 200 million years to a period when the Gulf of Mexico did not exist in any form you would recognize today. During the late Triassic and early Jurassic periods, the region that would eventually become the Gulf was part of a series of shallow basins and rift zones created as the supercontinent Pangaea slowly began to tear itself apart. As these basins formed, seawater flooded in, creating vast shallow seas that covered enormous areas. But these seas were not permanent. Over millions of years, the climate shifted, the connections to the open ocean would close and reopen, and during the periods when these shallow seas were cut off from the main ocean body, the water would slowly evaporate under the relentless heat. As it evaporated, it left behind what the water had been carrying dissolved in it all along. Salt. Enormous quantities of it, layer after layer after layer, compressed under the weight of new sediment deposited on top of it over millions of additional years. These ancient salt deposits, known to geologists as the Luan Salt Formation, are buried deep beneath the floor of the modern Gulf of Mexico. They are thousands of feet thick in places. They represent the accumulated residue of entire seas that lived and died before dinosaurs reached their peak, and they are the reason that brine pools exist today. Here is how it works. The Gulf of Mexico sea floor is not a solid, uniform slab of rock. It is riddled with fractures, faults, and weak points created by tectonic activity, sediment loading, and the movement of those buried salt deposits themselves. Salt under pressure behaves almost like a fluid. It flows, it shifts, it pushes upward through overlying rock, creating structures called salt diapirs, which are essentially columns of salt that have punched their way toward the surface over millions of years. As seawater seeps down through cracks and fissures in the ocean floor, it eventually reaches these ancient salt deposits. When it does, it begins dissolving the salt, creating an extremely concentrated solution that is radically different from normal seawater. Regular ocean water has a salinity of roughly 35 parts per thousand. The water in these brine pools can reach salinities of 100, 150, even 200 parts per thousand. That is 4 to nearly 6 times saltier than the ocean above. Water at that concentration is so dense that it is measurably heavier than the surrounding seawater, and because it is heavier, it sinks. It flows downhill along the sea floor until it finds a depression, a crater, a low point in the terrain, and there it collects, it pools, It forms a distinct body of liquid with a visible surface that is so sharply defined you can see exactly where the normal ocean water ends and the brine begins. The boundary between the brine and the surrounding seawater is so stark, so visually obvious that scientists have given it a specific name. They call it the halocline. It is the point where the salt concentration changes so abruptly that light refracts differently on either side, creating a shimmering, visible surface almost like looking at a lake through slightly warped glass. When the lights of a deep-sea submersible hit this boundary, the effect is extraordinary. The brine surface reflects the light in a way that normal seawater simply cannot. It ripples, it shimmers, it moves with slow, heavy waves that look nothing like the waves you see on a beach. They are denser, slower, more deliberate, as if the liquid itself is reluctant to move. Researchers who have spent their careers studying deep-sea environments have described the experience of encountering a brine pool for the first time as genuinely disorienting. Your brain knows you are underwater. Your instruments confirm you are nearly 3,000 feet below the surface, but your eyes are telling you that you are looking at a lake, a perfectly formed lake with a shoreline made of sediment and biological material, sitting in a world of absolute darkness. The cognitive dissonance is immediate and powerful. But the visual strangeness of these pools is only the beginning of the story, because these are not just pools of salty water. They are pools of salty water saturated with dissolved gases that are profoundly toxic to the vast majority of living things. As seawater interacts with the buried salt deposits, it does not just dissolve sodium chloride. It also liberates other substances trapped in the ancient formations, including methane and hydrogen sulfide. Methane you may recognize as the primary component of natural gas. Hydrogen sulfide is the compound responsible for the smell of rotten eggs, and it is lethal to most animals at even modest concentrations. Inside a brine pool, these gases are dissolved in the water at concentrations that are orders of magnitude higher than anything found in the normal ocean. The combination of extreme salinity and toxic gas saturation creates an environment that is essentially a chemical death zone, and the effects on anything that enters it are swift and devastating. This is where the story becomes genuinely disturbing. Researchers operating remotely operated vehicles in the Gulf of Mexico have captured footage on multiple occasions of marine animals encountering brine pools, and the results are always the same. A crab walking along the ocean floor searching for food approaches the edge of a pool. There is no visible warning. There is no change in the water that the crab can detect. The boundary is chemically abrupt but physically invisible to a creature relying on its basic senses. The crab reaches the edge and keeps walking. The moment its legs break the surface of the brine, its behavior changes instantly. Its movements become erratic. Its legs stiffen. It begins to convulse in sharp jerking motions that look almost mechanical. Within seconds, it stops moving entirely. Its body locks in place, and then slowly, almost gracefully, it sinks beneath the surface of the brine and disappears. The dense liquid closes over it without a ripple. The crab is gone, swallowed by a lake at the bottom of the sea that it never saw coming. Fish have been observed experiencing the same fate. Eels, shrimp. Anything that crosses the halocline enters a world of such extreme chemical hostility that survival is measured not in minutes but in seconds. The toxic shock is immediate. The hydrogen sulfide attacks the cellular mechanisms that allow the animal to process oxygen. The extreme salinity causes catastrophic osmotic stress, essentially pulling water out of the animal's cells at a rate its body cannot compensate for. The combination is lethal in a way that is almost mechanical in its efficiency. The animal does not struggle for long. It does not fight. It simply stops and sinks into a substance so dense that it holds the body suspended in a kind of permanent chemical embrace. And here is the detail that elevates this from disturbing to genuinely haunting. The brine preserves what it kills. Researchers exploring the pools have found the bodies of animals that had fallen in weeks or even months earlier, and they were remarkably intact. Crabs with every segment of their shell still perfectly defined. Fish with their scales still reflecting the lights of the submersible, their eyes still open frozen in the exact expression they wore in the moment of their death. The extreme salt concentration and the chemical composition of the brine essentially pickle anything that enters it, preserving soft tissue and hard structures alike in a way that normal seawater never could. The pool floor becomes a kind of museum of the dead, a perfectly preserved record of every creature that made the mistake of crossing the boundary. Some researchers have described it as one of the most unsettling things they have ever seen in their careers, not because it is violent or dramatic, but because it is so quiet, so still, so patient. One brine pool in particular has captured the imagination of both the scientific community and the general public in a way that few deep-sea discoveries ever have. Located roughly 3,300 feet below the surface of the Gulf of Mexico, it was discovered in 2014 by a research team from Temple University, led by Professor Eric Cordes. The pool is roughly 100 feet in circumference and approximately 12 feet deep. The water temperature inside it is nearly 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is dramatically warmer than the near-freezing water that surrounds it at that depth. The combination of extreme salinity, dissolved methane and hydrogen sulfide, and elevated temperature creates what the research team described as a toxic hot tub of death. They gave it a name that has since become iconic in the world of ocean science. They called it the Jacuzzi of Despair. The name might sound almost playful, almost light-hearted, but the researchers who coined it were not joking. They chose it precisely because it captured the surreal horror of what they were observing. A warm, inviting-looking pool of shimmering water surrounded by what appeared to be a thriving underwater garden, mussels crowding the shoreline, tube worms extending their delicate feeding structures into the water, microbial mats spreading across the surrounding sediment in intricate patterns. It looked like an oasis. It looked like a gathering place for life. And in a sense it was, but only at the edges. Anything that crossed the line, anything that moved from the shore into the water itself, was dead within seconds. The contrast between the teeming life at the margins and the absolute lethality of the pool itself was so stark that researchers found it deeply uncomfortable to watch. It was a death trap disguised as a paradise, and the creatures living around it were balanced on a razor edge between the chemicals they needed to survive and the chemicals that would kill them. Now here is where this story takes a turn that most people do not expect. Because despite the lethal nature of these pools, the ecosystems that have built themselves around them are among the most fascinating and scientifically important communities ever discovered on the ocean floor. The creatures living along the edges of brine pools do not operate the way life on the surface does. They cannot. There is no sunlight at these depths. There has never been sunlight at these depths. The concept of photosynthesis is meaningless here. Instead, these organisms have built their entire existence around a process called chemosynthesis. Rather than using sunlight to convert carbon dioxide and water into energy the way plants do on the surface, chemosynthetic bacteria use the chemical energy stored in molecules like methane and hydrogen sulfide to produce organic compounds. They eat the very chemicals that make the brine pools deadly. They take in methane and hydrogen sulfide and they convert them into the building blocks of life. These bacteria form the foundation of the entire brine pool ecosystem. They are the base of a food chain that exists in total darkness, powered entirely by poison. The mussels that crowd the shorelines of brine pools have evolved a relationship with these chemosynthetic bacteria that is so intimate it borders on fusion. The bacteria live inside the mussel's tissues, inside their gills specifically. The mussel provides the bacteria with a steady supply of methane and hydrogen sulfide drawn from the brine pool water, and the bacteria provide the mussel with nutrition. It is a symbiotic relationship that has been refined over millions of years of evolution to the point where neither partner can survive without the other. The mussels cannot digest food on their own in any meaningful way. Their digestive systems have atrophied over evolutionary time because they no longer need them. They get everything they need from their bacterial partners. In return, the bacterial get a safe, stable environment and a reliable supply of the chemicals they need to perform chemosynthesis. It is a partnership built on mutual dependence, and it works so well that the mussel colonies around brine pools can be incredibly dense, with thousands of individuals packed into every square meter of shoreline. Tube worms represent another branch of this chemosynthetic ecosystem, and they are, if anything, even more extraordinary than the mussels. Some species of tube worm found near brine pools and cold seeps in the Gulf of Mexico can grow to lengths of 6 feet or more. They have no mouth, they have no stomach, they have no digestive system at all. Like the mussels, they rely entirely on chemosynthetic bacteria living inside their bodies to provide them with nutrition. But what makes them truly remarkable is their lifespan. Some species of tube worm in the deep Gulf of Mexico are estimated to live for over 250 years. There are individual tube worms alive on the ocean floor right now that were born before the United States declared independence. They've been sitting in the dark feeding on toxic chemicals growing slowly and steadily for centuries. They have never seen light. They have never experienced a current strong enough to move them. They have simply existed in silence, doing the one thing that life does better than anything else in the universe: persisting. The microbial mats that spread across the sediment surrounding brine pools add yet another layer of complexity to these ecosystems. These mats are composed of dense communities of bacteria and archaea microorganisms that represent some of the oldest lineages of life on Earth. Some of these organisms are methanogens, creatures that produce methane as a byproduct of their metabolism. Others are sulfate reducers that process sulfate compounds from the seawater. Still others are methanotrophs that consume methane as their primary energy source. Together they form a complex interlocking web of chemical reactions that cycle nutrients through the ecosystem in ways that scientists are still working to fully understand. The mats themselves can be visually striking, forming bright white, orange, or yellow patches against the dark sediment of the ocean floor. In the lights of a submersible, they look almost like alien gardens, carefully cultivated and deliberately arranged. But there is no gardener. There is no design. There is only chemistry and time, and the relentless pressure of natural selection operating in a world where the sun is nothing more than a rumor. What makes these ecosystems so important to science goes far beyond their strangeness. Researchers believe that chemosynthetic communities like those found around brine pools may be living echoes of the very first life on Earth. 4 billion years ago, when our planet was young, the atmosphere contained no free oxygen. The oceans were hot, acidic, and bathed in chemicals that would be lethal to most modern organisms. Sunlight was blocked by thick clouds of volcanic ash and methane. Photosynthesis had not yet evolved. If life was going to start anywhere, it was going to have to start in the dark. It was going to have to find energy not from the sun, but from the chemistry of the planet itself. And that is exactly what chemosynthesis is. The brine pool ecosystems of the Gulf of Mexico may be direct descendants of those original primordial communities, living fossils that have been doing the same thing in the same way for billions of years, while the rest of life on Earth went through revolution after revolution after revolution, evolving eyes and legs and wings and brains, while the chemosynthetic world simply continued doing what it had always done, sitting in the dark, eating poison, persisting. This connection to the origins of life has attracted attention from a field that most people would not immediately associate with the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico. Astrobiology, the study of life beyond Earth. For decades, astrobiologists have been searching for places in the solar system where extraterrestrial life might conceivably exist, and the discovery of brine pool ecosystems has fundamentally reshaped that search. Consider Europa, one of the 4 large moons of Jupiter. Europa is covered in a shell of ice roughly 10 to 15 miles thick, but beneath that ice there is strong evidence for a global liquid water ocean that contains more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. The floor of that ocean is believed to be in contact with a rocky mantle where hydrothermal activity and chemical interactions could produce exactly the kinds of conditions found around brine pools on Earth. Methane, hydrogen sulfide, extreme salinity, total darkness, crushing pressure. If life can thrive under those conditions at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico, then there is no scientific reason to assume it could not also thrive at the bottom of an ocean on Europa. The same logic applies to Enceladus, a small moon of Saturn that has become one of the most exciting targets in the search for extraterrestrial life. In 2005, the Cassini spacecraft observed enormous plumes of water vapor and ice particles erupting from cracks near Enceladus' south pole. Analysis of those plumes revealed the presence of sodium chloride salt organic molecules and molecular hydrogen, all of which are consistent with hydrothermal activity on the floor of a subsurface ocean. The chemical signature was remarkably similar to what you would find around a cold seep or brine pool in the deep ocean on Earth. When astrobiologists looked at that data and compared it to what was known about chemosynthetic ecosystems in the Gulf of Mexico, the implication was immediate and profound. The ingredients for chemosynthetic life are not unique to Earth. They exist elsewhere in our solar system right now. The question is no longer whether the right conditions exist. The question is whether anything has taken advantage of them. This is why the brine pools of the Gulf of Mexico matter far beyond their immediate strangeness. They are not just curiosities. They are not just eerie underwater landmarks for deep-sea researchers to photograph and name. They are windows into a version of biology that predates everything we think of as normal life. They demonstrate that life does not require sunlight. It does not require moderate temperatures. It does not require oxygen. It does not require anything that the surface world takes for granted. All it requires is chemistry and time and the tiniest sliver of thermodynamic opportunity. Give life a gradient to exploit. Give it a chemical reaction that releases even a fraction of usable energy, and it will find a way to build something out of it. It will find a way to persist. The challenges of studying brine pools are enormous, and they deserve attention because they help explain why we still know so little about these environments, despite their importance. The Gulf of Mexico is vast. Its floor covers an area of roughly 600,000 square miles, and the average depth is over 5,000 feet. Exploring it requires remotely operated vehicles that cost millions of dollars to build and operate. Each dive is a logistical undertaking involving research vessels, specialized equipment teams of engineers and scientists, and enormous amounts of funding. The ROVs themselves must be able to withstand pressures exceeding 150 atmospheres and temperatures near freezing, while carrying cameras, sensors, sampling equipment, and manipulator arms capable of collecting biological and chemical samples with precision. A single dive to a brine pool can take hours just in transit as the vehicle descends slowly through thousands of feet of water column before it even reaches the sea floor. Once there, the researchers may have only a few hours of bottom time before the vehicle must begin its ascent. In that narrow window, they must locate the pool document, its physical characteristics, collect water samples, measure temperature, salinity, and gas concentrations, collect biological specimens from the surrounding ecosystem, and record video footage for later analysis. It is painstaking work, conducted in one of the most hostile environments on the planet, and every piece of data that comes back represents an enormous investment of time, money, and expertise. Despite these challenges, the discoveries keep coming. In recent years, researchers have identified brine pools in the Gulf of Mexico that exhibit characteristics no one predicted. Some pools have been found with distinct layers of different brine concentrations stacked on top of each other like a chemical layer cake. Others have been found with unusual microbial communities that appear to be performing chemical reactions never before documented in nature. One team discovered a brine pool surrounded by a ring of dead mussels, hundreds of them arranged in a perfect circle around the pool margin. Analysis revealed that the pool had expanded at some point in the past, possibly due to a shift in the underlying salt deposit, killing the mussels that had been living along its original shoreline. The dead mussels marked the old boundary, like a fossil record of the pool's former size, while new colonies had established themselves along the current edge. The pool had grown. It had moved. It had swallowed the communities that had trusted its stability, and then new communities had moved in to take their place, building their lives on the ruins of the ones that came before. Life replacing life in an endless cycle of colonization and destruction playing out in total silence, in total darkness, thousands of feet below the nearest ray of sunlight. There is one more aspect of brine pools that deserves attention, and it is perhaps the most philosophically unsettling of all. The methane associated with these pools is not just dissolved in the brine. In many locations, it is also present in the form of methane hydrate, a solid ice-like substance that forms when methane gas is trapped within a lattice of water molecules under conditions of high pressure and low temperature. Methane hydrate looks like ice, but if you hold a flame to it, burns. It is sometimes called the ice that burns, and it exists in enormous quantities beneath the ocean floor worldwide. Some estimates suggest that the total amount of carbon stored in methane hydrates globally exceeds the carbon in all known reserves of coal oil and natural gas combined. It is a staggering quantity of stored energy and stored greenhouse potential. If ocean temperatures were to rise significantly, if the delicate balance of pressure and temperature that keeps these hydrates stable were to be disrupted, the methane could be released into the water column and eventually into the atmosphere on a scale that would dwarf any human contribution to climate change. This has happened before. Roughly 55 million years ago, during an event called the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, a massive release of methane, possibly from destabilized ocean hydrates, triggered a period of extreme global warming that lasted for over 100,000 years. Ocean temperatures rose by as much as 8 degrees Celsius. Entire ecosystems were restructured. Species that had dominated for millions of years vanished. The brine pools of the Gulf of Mexico sit at the intersection of this story. They are connected to the same geological systems that produce and store methane hydrate. They are part of the same deep earth chemistry that has the power to reshape the planet's climate on geological timescales. They are not just strange, they are consequential. Right now, as you hear these words, there are dozens, perhaps hundreds of brine pools scattered across the floor of the Gulf of Mexico. Some have been studied extensively, mapped and sampled and documented in scientific papers that will be read and cited for decades. Others have never been seen by human eyes or human instruments. They sit in the dark in places no submersible has ever visited, surrounded by communities of organisms that have been living and dying and being replaced for longer than humans have had language to describe them. The mussels filter the toxic water through their gills, feeding their bacterial partners in exchange for sustenance. The tube worms extend their plumes into the chemical gradient, growing a fraction of a millimeter per year, adding to bodies that are already older than most nations. The microbial mats spread across the sediment, processing methane and sulfide in reactions that have been running continuously since before the dinosaurs went extinct. And at the center of it all, the brine sits, perfectly still, perfectly patient, its surface catching no light because there is no light to catch, its waves moving in slow, dense undulations that no human ear will ever hear. There is something deeply humbling about the existence of these places. We live on the surface of this planet in a thin, bright, noisy layer of air and light, and rebuild our understanding of life around the conditions we experience every day: sunlight, oxygen, moderate temperatures, fresh water. We define habitability by our own standards, and then we look out into the universe and search for places that match those standards, as if life itself were as narrow and as particular as we are. The brine pools of the Gulf of Mexico are a reminder that life is not narrow, it is not particular. It is not constrained by our definitions or limited by our imagination. It is opportunistic and relentless and endlessly creative in ways that we are only beginning to comprehend. It found a way to thrive in boiling water around hydrothermal vents. It found a way to survive inside solid rock miles beneath the Earth's surface. It found a way to persist in pools of toxic brine at the bottom of the ocean, surrounded by chemicals that would kill a human being in seconds. And it did all of this without any awareness of what it was accomplishing, without any plan, without any intention, just chemistry following its gradients, energy flowing downhill, molecules assembling and replicating and competing and cooperating in the dark. Half a mile below the Gulf of Mexico, in a world no human will ever visit without a machine to protect them, there is a lake that kills everything that enters it. Around its shores, life thrives in forms that would have been unimaginable to scientists just 50 years ago. Beneath its surface, the preserved bodies of the dead float in suspended animation, pickled by the very chemistry that sustains the living. And somewhere in the ancient salt that feeds it, there is a record of seas that evaporated 200 million years ago, leaving behind the raw material for a death trap that would not form for another 100 million years. Timescales that reduce human history to a footnote. Processes that were old before the first dinosaur drew breath, and at the center of it all a simple truth that is easy to say but difficult to fully absorb. Life does not need us. It does not need our conditions. It does not need our conditions. It does not need our light, or our air, or our approval. It just needs a chance, a chemical gradient, a source of energy, a crack in the rock, a deposit of ancient salt. Give it that, and it will do what it has always done. It will find a way, and it will persist long after the last human being has forgotten it was ever.